The warning light screamed red across Commander Arin's control panel as her diplomatic ship spun wildly through space. What started as a routine trade mission to the Outer Rim had turned into a nightmare when her engines suddenly exploded without warning. Metal groaned and sparked around her as the ship lost all power, gravity pulling her toward the nearest celestial body, a moon that glowed an ominous yellow-green against the darkness of space. Arin's crystalline hands moved frantically over the emergency controls, but nothing responded. Her silicon-based body, evolved on a world of gentle minerals and soft light, began to tingle with the first signs of atmospheric poisoning as toxic gases leaked into her cabin. Through the cracked viewport, she could see Keth 7 growing larger, a moon notorious throughout the galaxy for its deadly sulfuric storms and rivers of molten lava. The crash landing was brutal. Her ship carved a burning trail across the moon's surface before slamming into a rocky outcrop. Arin dragged herself from the wreckage, her normally smooth, crystalline skin already beginning to cloud and crack in the poisonous air. Each breath felt like swallowing liquid fire. Her people's beautiful, translucent bodies weren't meant for places like this. She stumbled to her emergency communication array, one of the few systems still functioning. Her fingers shook as she activated the distress beacon, knowing she had maybe hours before her biological matrix completely broke down. The sulfuric atmosphere was eating away at her cellular structure, turning her crystalline form brittle and grey. "This is Commander Arin of the Crystalline Hegemony," she spoke into the transmitter, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing panic. "My ship has crashed on Keith 7. I need immediate medical assistance." She paused, knowing what came. Next would sound impossible. "I require someone to retrieve isotope 7 from the planet's molten core. Without it, my biology will fail within 6 hours." Even as she said it, Arin knew how insane it sounded. Keth 7's core was buried beneath miles of toxic storms, acid rain that could melt most metals, and lava flows hot enough to vaporize standard spacesuits. The isotope she needed existed only in the planet's heart, where temperatures reached levels that would kill most known species instantly. She broadcast her message across all emergency frequencies, repeating it in 12 different languages. Around the galaxy, various civilizations received her transmission. The response was swift and predictable: silence. Her own people's rescue protocols required a 3-day risk assessment. The militaristic Hammerhorn Empire considered it beneath their warrior code to attempt suicide missions for diplomatic personnel. The logical Vorthan Collective ran probability calculations and determined the mission had a 98.7% fatality rate. Arin slumped against her damaged ship, watching the toxic yellow clouds swirl overhead. Her skin was turning increasingly gray and brittle. She could feel her internal structures beginning to crystallize in the wrong patterns, a process that would become irreversible within hours. In the distance, she could see the glow of the lava flows that marked the path to the planet's core. A path that might as well have led to another dimension for all the good it did her. She continued broadcasting, her voice growing weaker with each repetition, not really expecting anyone to answer. After all, what sane being would attempt such an impossible rescue mission for someone they'd never met? Captain Jiho was halfway through his morning coffee when the distress signal crackled through his ship's communication system. The Star Wanderer wasn't much to look at, a beat-up cargo hauler that had seen better decades, but her engines were solid, and her pilot was stubborn as hell. Jiho had been running supplies to mining stations in the Outer Rim for the past 3 years, a lonely but honest living that suited him just fine. The transmission made him pause with his cup halfway to his lips, a crystalline being trapped on Keth 7, slowly dying from atmospheric poisoning. He'd heard of the crystalline hegemony before, peaceful folks who looked like living glass sculptures and had never hurt anyone. The woman's voice carried a quiet desperation that made something twist in his chest. "Isotope 7 from the planet's core," he muttered, already pulling up star charts on his navigation computer. Keth 7 was only 2 hours away at full burn. He'd delivered mining equipment to that sector before and knew the moon's reputation. Most pilots wouldn't even fly through its orbital space, let alone land on the surface. His communication panel lit up with chatter from other ships in the area. A Vorthan science vessel was broadcasting detailed risk calculations: 98.7% chance of mission failure, 99.2% chance of pilot death, 0 strategic value for rescue attempt. A Hammerhorn military cruiser dismissed the situation entirely, calling it an unworthy death for warriors. Even ships from the crystalline hegemony were requesting permission to form a rescue committee, which would take at least 3 days to organize. Jiho listened to the debates with growing annoyance. 3 days. The woman would be dead in 6 hours. He'd never met a crystalline being before, but he'd seen pictures. They looked fragile as spun glass, beautiful in an otherworldly way. The thought of someone like that dying alone on a toxic hellscape, while bureaucrats argued about proper procedures, made his jaw clench. Without really thinking about it, he was already changing course. His hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, plotting a direct route to Keth 7. The Star Wanderer groaned as her engines kicked into overdrive, but she responded like the reliable old girl she was. "This is Captain Jiho of the freighter, Star Wanderer," he broadcast on the emergency channel. "I'm en route to Keth 7 for pickup, ETA 90 minutes. The communication channel exploded with responses. The Vorthan science vessel immediately began transmitting detailed warnings about atmospheric toxicity, radiation levels, and geological instability. The Hammerhorn cruiser called him a fool who would die for nothing. Even the crystalline hegemony ships tried to convince him to wait for proper rescue protocols. Jiho ignored them all. He'd grown up in the asteroid mining colonies, where people helped each other because that's what you did. When someone was in trouble, you didn't form committees or calculate risks. You grabbed your gear and went. It was that simple. Other ships began changing course to follow him at a safe distance, their captains clearly thinking he was either crazy or had some secret human technology that made the mission possible. The Vorthan vessel kept broadcasting increasingly frantic statistics about human physiological limitations in toxic environments. A news ship from the Galactic Broadcasting Network appeared out of nowhere, apparently smelling a story. Jiho just smiled grimly and pushed his engines harder. The Star Wanderer wasn't built for heroics, and neither was he. But sometimes life didn't give you a choice about being a hero. Sometimes someone just needed help, and you were the only one close enough to provide it. The first wisps of Keth 7's atmosphere hit the Star Wanderer like a spray of liquid fire. Jiho watched his hull integrity readings drop from green to yellow to angry red in the span of 30 seconds. The sulfuric compounds in the air were literally eating through his ship's outer plating, but he'd expected that. What he hadn't expected was how fast it would happen. "Well, that's not ideal," he muttered, adjusting his descent angle to minimize exposure time. His atmospheric shields were already overloading, throwing sparks across the control room. The acrid smell of burning electronics filled the cabin as system after system began failing. "Human vessel, this is Commander Arin," crackled a voice through his radio, weak but clear. "Please reconsider your approach. The atmospheric conditions will destroy your ship before you reach the surface." Jiho grinned despite the circumstances. "Little late for that advice, Commander. I'm already committed to this dance." His navigation console exploded in a shower of sparks, but he kept flying by instrument readings and pure instinct. "How you holding up down there?" There was a pause. My crystalline matrix is destabilizing, but you should abort this mission immediately. The survival probability is nearly 0. "Yeah, I've been getting that a lot today," Jiho replied, wrestling with his controls as another system died. His life support was making unhappy noises, and the hull breach alarms were screaming so loudly he'd given up trying to silence them. "Don't worry about me, though. I've gotten out of worse scrapes than this." He was lying, of course. This was definitely the worst scrape he'd ever been in, but no point in worrying the woman he was trying to rescue. Through his cracked viewport, he could see the surface of Keth 7 approaching fast, a nightmare landscape of bubbling acid lakes and rivers of molten rock. The whole moon looked like someone had taken a perfectly good planet and dunked it in battery acid. "You're insane," Arin's voice came through the static. But there was something else there now, hope maybe, or just disbelief that someone was actually doing this. "My ex-girlfriend would agree with you," Jiho said, fighting to keep his ship from spinning out of control as another atmospheric pocket hit him. His engines were running at 40% power and dropping fast, though she usually used more colorful language. Above them, the collection of alien ships maintaining safe orbital distance were having what could only be described as a viewing party. The Vorthan science vessel was running continuous scans and broadcasting detailed reports about the human ship's deterioration. The Hammerhorn cruiser had started what sounded suspiciously like a betting pool on how long Jiho would survive. Even the news ship was providing live commentary to what was apparently becoming a galaxy-wide broadcast. "The human vessel has now lost primary propulsion," announced the Vorthan captain in his emotionless tone. "Hull breach probability exceeds 90%. Atmospheric penetration in 30 seconds will result in total structural failure." "Put me down for 20 credits that he makes it to the surface," came a gruff voice from the Hammerhorn ship. "These humans are too stupid to die easy." Jiho would have laughed if he wasn't busy trying to keep his ship from disintegrating around him. His main engines had just cut out completely, leaving him in an uncontrolled descent toward a landscape. That looked like the galaxy's worst vacation destination. The Star Wanderer was shaking apart piece by piece, but she was still flying. Barely. "Hang tight, Commander," he called to Aaron, pulling up his emergency landing protocols. "We're coming in hot, but we're coming in." The Star Wanderer hit the surface of Keth 7 like a meteor, carving a smoking trench through the rocky ground, before finally sliding to a stop against a cluster of crystalline formations. Jiho hung upside down in his pilot's seat for a moment, checking to make sure all his parts were still attached. His ship was making the kind of groaning sounds that meant she'd never fly again, but she'd gotten him down in one piece. "Commander Aaron, you still with me?" he called into his radio as he unstrapped himself from his seat. "I'm here," came her weak reply. "But Captain Jiho, you need to leave immediately. The atmospheric toxicity will kill you within minutes." Jiho looked around his ruined cargo bay, taking inventory of what he had to work with. His environmental suit was designed for spacewalks, not toxic atmosphere survival. According to the readings, it would keep him alive for maybe 45 minutes in this hellish environment. The core site was at least a 2-hour trek through some of the most dangerous terrain in the galaxy. "Well, that's a problem," he admitted, then shrugged. "Guess I'll have to work fast." He started grabbing everything that might be useful. Emergency. Welding torches, fire extinguishers, mining cables from his last cargo run, even the portable heating unit from his quarters. None of it was designed for what he had in mind, but Jiho had learned long ago that desperation made the best engineer. His first challenge appeared 50 meters from his crash site, a pool of bubbling acid that stretched across his path like a moat from hell. The stuff was eating through the rocks on the shoreline, sending up clouds of toxic vapor that made his suit's radiation detector click like an angry insect. "Let's see if this works," he muttered, grabbing one of his fire extinguishers. The chemical foam was designed to smother electrical fires, but basic chemistry suggested it might neutralize acid too. He sprayed a path across the pool, watching. The foam hiss and bubble as it reacted with the acid. It held long enough for him to sprint across, though his boots were smoking by the time he reached the other side. Up in orbit, the alien observers were having what could only be described as collective heart attacks. "The human just neutralized a Class 5 acid pool with firefighting equipment," the Vorthan scientist reported, his usually calm voice cracking with disbelief. "This violates several fundamental principles of chemistry." "Are you recording this?" demanded the news reporter. "My viewers need to see this insanity." Jiho's next obstacle was a river of lava that cut directly across his route to the core. The molten rock was moving fast enough to sweep away anything that fell in, and hot enough to melt his suit in seconds. But his cargo manifest had included mining equipment for the outer rim stations, including heavy-duty cables rated for extreme temperatures. He rigged a makeshift zip line using his welding torch to anchor the cable to the rocks on both sides. The metal was already glowing cherry red from the heat by the time he clipped himself in and started sliding across. His suit's temperature warnings were screaming, but he made it to the other side before anything critical melted. "Captain, what you're doing is impossible." Aaron's voice came through his radio, wonder mixing with concern. "Yeah, well, impossible just means nobody's been stubborn enough to try it yet," Jiho replied, checking his oxygen levels. 30 minutes left, and he was maybe halfway to the core. The alien observers had given up trying to explain what they were seeing and had started frantically taking notes instead. The core facility looked like something out of a nightmare. Ancient machinery, half-melted and covered in toxic residue, jutted from the walls of a cavern that glowed with the heat of the planet's molten heart. The air shimmered with temperatures that should have cooked Jai-Ho instantly, but his makeshift modifications to his environmental suit were somehow holding together. Barely. "Okay, Commander, I'm at the core site," he reported, his voice casual despite the fact that he was standing in what amounted to the galaxy's most dangerous basement. "Just need to figure out how to extract this isotope without any of the proper equipment." Aaron's voice crackled through the static, weaker now but still determined. "Captain, the extraction requires a Class 7 molecular separator and containment field generators. Without them, the isotope will destabilize and—" "Yeah, about that," Jai-Ho interrupted, examining the ancient extraction machinery. Most of it was fried, but the core mechanism looked salvageable. "I don't have any of that fancy stuff, but I've got a power coupling from my ship and a mining laser that's mostly broken. Think that'll work?" The silence on the radio was so long that Jai-Ho thought he'd lost the connection. When Aaron finally spoke, her voice was faint with disbelief. That shouldn't be possible. The power requirements alone would—" "Well, let's find out," Jai-Ho said cheerfully, already stripping wires from the mining laser. The device was designed to cut through asteroid rock, not perform delicate isotope extraction, but the basic principles were the same: focused energy beams. He just needed to jury-rig it to work with the core facility's systems. The ground beneath his feet rumbled ominously as he worked. Keth 7's seismic activity was legendary, and being this close to the core meant he was basically standing on top of a geological time bomb. But Jai-Ho had learned to ignore problems he couldn't solve in favor of focusing on ones he could. "So while I'm rewiring this thing," he said, connecting his ship's power coupling to the extraction chamber, "tell me about your homeworld. What's it like being made of crystal? Do you guys eat rocks or what?" Aaron's laugh was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We don't eat at all, actually. We absorb energy directly from sunlight and mineral resonances. My world is beautiful. Everything sings in harmony. The mountains, the rivers, even the cities are grown rather than built." "Sounds peaceful," Jai-Ho replied, coaxing power through jury-rigged connections that sparked and protested. "Very different from Earth. We're loud, messy, always in a hurry to get somewhere. You'd probably hate our music, all drums and guitars. And people shouting. I've never heard Earth music," Aaron admitted. "What's it like?" The extraction chamber hummed to life just as another seismic tremor shook the facility. Chunks of ceiling crashed down around Jai-Ho, but he kept working. "Oh man, where do I start? We've got everything from classical symphonies to death metal, though I'm more of a jazz guy myself. You know, improvisation, making it up as you go along." "Like what you're doing now?" "Exactly like what I'm doing now," he grinned, watching the isotope begin to form in the containment field. The whole setup was held together with hope and electrical tape, but it was working. The precious isotope 7 was crystallizing in the chamber, glowing with an inner light that somehow looked both dangerous and beautiful. The facility groaned around him as another tremor hit, this one strong enough to crack the walls. Lava began seeping through the fissures, turning the already hellish environment into something even worse. But Jai-Ho just hummed under his breath, an old Earth jazz standard, and kept working. The isotope container felt heavier than it should, have as Jai-Ho secured it in his makeshift radiation shielding, a combination of his ship's emergency blankets and some lead plating he'd torn from the core facility walls. The Geiger counter on his suit was clicking like an angry cricket, which probably wasn't a good sign, but the container seemed to be holding the worst of the radiation inside. "Package secured, Commander," he reported, starting his trek back through the crumbling facility. "One order of life-saving isotope ready for delivery." The ground beneath his feet was buckling and heaving as Keth 7's geological anger reached new heights. What had been a dangerous but navigable landscape on his way in was now actively trying to kill him. Lava geysers erupted without warning, and the acid pools had expanded into lakes that blocked several of his planned routes. "Captain, your radiation exposure must be critical by now." Arin's voice carried a note of genuine worry that made something warm flutter in Jiho's chest, despite his circumstances. "You need to move faster." "Actually, I'm thinking we should take this slow and steady," he replied, carefully picking his way around a new fissure that was belching toxic gas. "No point in rushing and dropping your medicine in a lava pit, right? Besides, this gives us time to plan our victory celebration." Up in orbit, the collection of alien vessels had transformed from a casual betting pool into something resembling a scientific conference. The Vorthan research ship was broadcasting detailed behavioral analysis reports across multiple frequencies. Subject: continues to display irrational optimism despite deteriorating physical condition, the lead scientist dictated to his recording device. Radiation exposure should have induced panic or delirium by now, yet the human maintains casual conversation and forward-planning behavior. The Hammerhorn military commander had stopped taking bets entirely and was instead furiously scribbling notes. "This changes everything we know about human psychology under extreme stress," he muttered to his crew. "They don't break the way other species do." Back on the surface, Jiho was using his remaining fire extinguisher to create a path through another expanded acid pool, humming jazz standards to himself as he worked. His hands were shaking slightly, whether from radiation poisoning or just exhaustion, he wasn't sure, but his voice remained steady. "So once we get you patched up," he continued his conversation with Arin, "I'm thinking coffee. There's this little place on Station 7 that makes the best synthetic brew in 3 sectors. Or if you don't drink coffee, they've got this mineral supplement thing that's supposed to be amazing. You're asking me on a date?" Arin's voice carried a note of amazement that had nothing to do with the impossibility of his rescue mission. "Well, yeah," Jiho said as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "I mean, after going through all this trouble to meet you, it'd be rude not to at least buy you dinner, or whatever crystalline beings do instead of dinner." His environmental suit was definitely failing now. The internal temperature was climbing steadily, and several warning lights were blinking red. His oxygen reserves were running dangerously low, and the radiation detector had given up clicking and was now emitting a steady, ominous whine. "Captain, your vital signs are," Arin started to say. "Are what?" "Ruggedly handsome. I get that a—" "Lot," Jiho interrupted, though his breathing was getting labored. He could see his crashed ship in the distance now, maybe another 20 minutes if he could keep moving. "Don't worry about me, Commander. I've got a date to keep, and I never miss a date." The alien observers had completely abandoned their scientific objectivity and were now simply watching in stunned silence as the human continued his impossible journey. Jiho stumbled the last 100 meters to Arin's crash site, his legs barely holding him upright. His environmental suit was more duct tape and prayers than actual protection now, and his Geiger counter had finally given up making noise altogether. But he was grinning like an idiot, because there she was, Commander Arin of the Crystalline, hegemony, looking exactly like a living sculpture made of starlight and glass. She was beautiful, even dying. Her normally crystal-clear skin had turned cloudy and grey, like frosted glass, and hairline cracks spread across her arms and face where the toxic atmosphere was breaking down her cellular structure. But her eyes, deep blue like sapphires, were still bright with intelligence and growing wonder as she watched him approach. "You actually made it," she whispered, her voice carrying that wind chime quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. "Told you I would," Jiho said, carefully setting down the isotope container. His hands were shaking badly now, whether from radiation sickness or exhaustion, but he forced them steady as he activated the treatment sequence. "Sorry about the delay. Traffic was murder." The isotope began to glow as it interacted with Arin's failing biology. Jiho had studied the medical files during his descent, learning the basics of crystalline physiology through necessity and determination. The treatment wasn't complicated, just direct application of the isotope to her major resonance points, but it required steady hands and precise timing. "Hold still," he murmured, gently placing the glowing crystal against the pulse point on her wrist. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Color began returning to her skin, the grey cloudiness clearing like morning mist. The cracks in her crystalline surface sealed themselves with tiny sparkles of light. Arin stared at him in amazement as her strength returned. "You studied our medical procedures. When?" "On the way down," Jiho admitted, moving to apply the isotope to her other wrist. "Figured it'd be pretty embarrassing to come all this way and then mess up the easy part." He paused as a wave of dizziness hit him. "Though I have to admit, you guys have some seriously complicated biology. Do you really photosynthesize through your fingernails?" "Secondary absorption sites," Arin confirmed, watching him work with growing concern. His face was pale beneath his helmet, and she could see the radiation burns on his hands through his torn gloves. "Captain, you're severely poisoned. We need to get you medical attention immediately." "In a minute," Jiho said, finishing the treatment and slumping back against her damaged ship. "Just need to catch my breath first." He fumbled in his emergency pack and pulled out a ration bar. "Want some? It's not much, but it's got good calories." Arin laughed despite everything, a sound like crystal bells in a gentle breeze. "I don't eat food, remember. We absorb energy." "Right, the mineral resonance thing," Jiho nodded, taking a bite of the ration bar. "So how does that work exactly? Do you just stand in sunlight and charge up like a solar panel?" As they waited for rescue ships to arrive, Arin found herself explaining the fundamental principles of crystalline existence to this remarkable human who'd risked everything to save her. She told him about harmonic frequencies that could heal or harm, about the great crystal gardens of her homeworld, where her people meditated in perfect silence, about the philosophy of resonance that guided their peaceful civilization. "We believe that all life vibrates at specific frequencies," she explained. "When beings are in harmony, they create beautiful music together. When they're in discord, things get ugly fast," Jiho finished. "Makes sense. Kind of like jazz, actually. It's all about finding the right rhythm with the other players." The fact that this dying, radiation-poisoned human was comparing her, people's most sacred philosophy, to earth music should have been insulting. Instead, Arin found it oddly profound. The first rescue ship to break atmosphere was a sleek, crystalline hegemony medical vessel, its hull gleaming like polished diamond against Keth 7's toxic sky. As the medical team rushed toward the crash site with their advanced equipment and emergency protocols, they stopped short at what they found. Commander Arin, fully recovered and glowing with health, was sitting cross-legged next to a human who looked like he'd been through a blender. Captain Jiho was pale, radiation-sick, and his environmental suit was held together with what appeared to be optimism and electrical tape. But he was smiling and gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "So I'm thinking that little restaurant on Kepler Station for our second date," he was saying, completely ignoring the fact that he was probably dying. "They've got this view of the nebula that's supposed to be incredible. Though if you prefer something quieter, there's this meditation garden on Lunar Colony." "Captain Jiho," Arin interrupted gently as the medical team approached, "you're planning our second date before we've even had our first one." "Well, yeah," he replied, as if this was perfectly logical. "Gotta have something to look forward to, right? Besides, coffee on Station 7 is just the warm-up. The real date needs to be somewhere special." The crystalline medical team exchanged bewildered looks. In their entire recorded history, no being had ever risked their life for someone they'd never met. The concept was so foreign to their logical, harmonious society that they literally had no words for it in their language. Within hours, the story was spreading across every communication network in the galaxy. The human who dove into a toxic hellscape to save a stranger. The impossible rescue that violated every known principle of risk assessment and self-preservation. News crews from dozens of species converged on the system, all trying to understand what they'd witnessed. The Vorthan Collective held emergency sessions to analyze the behavioral data they'd collected. Their top xenopsychologists were baffled by the recordings of Jiho casually chatting about music and coffee while walking through conditions that should have induced complete psychological breakdown. "The human displayed no logical decision-making process," reported Chief Analyst Vex 7 to the Collective Council. "No risk assessment, no consideration of personal survival probability, no evaluation of strategic value. He simply acted as if saving the crystalline being was the only possible choice. The Hammerhorn Empire was having their own crisis of understanding. Their warrior culture respected courage in battle, but this was something different entirely. This wasn't about honor or glory or proving strength to enemies. This was about helping someone who needed help, for no other reason than that they asked. "We've been thinking about humans all wrong," growled General Thakmore to his war council. "We assumed they were weak because they avoid unnecessary conflict. But this is a different kind of strength entirely." Even the peaceful Federation of Gentle Worlds was reconsidering their assessments. They'd classified humans as aggressively unstable after observing their tendency toward violence and chaos. But Jiho's actions suggested something else entirely, a species capable of incredible selflessness when others were in danger. Back on Keth 7, as medical teams worked to treat Jiho's radiation poisoning, reporters bombarded both rescuer and rescued with questions they couldn't answer. "Captain Jiho, what motivated you to attempt such an impossible rescue?" asked a galactic news correspondent. Jiho, now connected to various medical devices but still conscious, looked genuinely confused by the question. "She needed help," he said simply. "What else was I supposed to do?" "But the risk to your own life." "What?" "About it," Jiho shrugged. "Life's risky. You can die crossing the street or eating bad seafood. At least this way, if something went wrong, it would have been for a good reason." The reporter turned to Arin, who was glowing softly with renewed health. "Commander, what do you think this says about human nature?" Arin looked at Jiho, who was already dozing off despite the chaos around them, and smiled. "I think it says that humans might be the most remarkable species in the galaxy. They just don't know it yet." 3 months after the Keth 7 incident, Commander E. Harin found herself in the strangest position of her career. She was famous, not for her decades of diplomatic service or her expertise in interstellar trade negotiations, but for being the alien who discovered something extraordinary about humans that the rest of the galaxy had completely missed. The interview requests came from every corner of known space. News networks, academic institutions, even military strategists wanted to hear her story. She sat in her quarters aboard the diplomatic station, looking at another stack of communication requests, and shook her head in amazement. All because their stubborn human freighter captain had decided to help a stranger. The most remarkable thing, she told the latest interviewer, a serious-looking Vorthan scientist, wasn't that he saved me. It was that he never considered not saving me. For Captain Jiho, it wasn't a choice at all. Someone needed help, so he helped. The risk, the impossibility, the fact that we'd never met. None of that mattered to him. The interviewer nodded thoughtfully. "Our behavioral analysis suggests this might be a common human trait. We're calling it irrational compassion syndrome." Arin laughed, a sound like wind chimes that had become her trademark in interviews. "There's nothing irrational about it. It's the most rational thing in the universe. If you can help someone, you help them. How is that complicated?" Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Captain Jiho was trying very hard to avoid all the attention. His recovery from radiation poisoning had been slower than expected, giving reporters plenty of time to track him down to the medical facility on Kepler station. He'd taken to hiding in the maintenance corridors whenever he spotted news crews in the hallways. "I don't understand what the big deal is," he complained to his doctor, a kindly healer named Dr. Yesh who'd become something of a friend during his treatment. "I heard someone needed help, so I helped. That's it. That's the whole story, Doctor." Yesh, who belonged to a species that calculated the emotional cost-benefit of every action, found Jiho's attitude fascinating. "But Captain, you risked your life for someone you'd never met. In my culture, such an action would require months of deliberation and formal council approval." "That's insane," Jiho replied flatly. "By the time you finished your meetings, she'd have been dead. Sometimes you just have to act, you know." The ripple effects of the Keth 7 rescue were spreading throughout galactic civilization in ways both subtle and profound. The Vorthan Collective quietly updated their human behavioral assessment files, adding new categories like spontaneous altruism and context-independent assistance protocols. The Hammerhorn Empire began including human psychological profiles in their military training, not as enemies to defeat, but as potential allies whose motivations they needed to understand. Most significantly, first contact protocols across dozens of species were being revised. The old assumption that intelligent beings would always act in calculated self-interest was being replaced with something more complex, the recognition that humans, at least, operated on principles that couldn't be easily quantified or predicted. The crystalline hegemony formally appointed Arin as their first ambassador to human space, a position that didn't exist before, but suddenly seemed necessary. Her first official act was to establish cultural exchange programs designed to help other species understand what she'd learned. That humans possessed a kind of moral courage that was both completely inexplicable and absolutely reliable. As for Jiho and Arin's promised coffee date, it finally happened 6 months later on Station 7, just as he'd planned. They sat by the observation deck, watching ships come and go while sipping drinks. Coffee for him, a mineral-enriched solution for her that sparkled like liquid starlight. "You know," Arin said, "I still get interview requests about our rescue. Every day. They want to understand what makes humans different." Jiho shrugged, watching a cargo hauler much like his old ship dock at the station. "We're not different. We just do what needs doing." Doesn't everyone? And that, Arin realized, was exactly what made them extraordinary. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.